I have Steve Marchand back on the show. We have so much to catch up on, but before we do that, we have to have Andrew warm us up.
Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up. Yo, there's no place to hide now that he's arrived. I'm saying he ain't playing now with this campaign. Bang, dang, it's in. Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up with. Drew Yang Gang, that's who I hooked up. Yo, there's no place to hide now that he's arrived. I'm saying he ain't playing now with this campaign. Bang, dang, it's in. Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello and Merry Christmas, nerds.
Hello and Merry Christmas, nerds.
Ho, 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 nerds. Steve, welcome back, man.
Great to see you again. And it has been too long.
Every time I see that trailer, it just brings back really positive, hopeful energy. And I can't help but say, like, wow, how much times have changed since that presidential campaign. How are you holding up?
I mean, I think I'm like a lot of Americans. There have been some great moments, in personal life and professional life and so forth the last couple of years. Because we are talking now almost a couple of years since COVID really kicked in, and obviously since Andrew was a presidential candidate. But the amount of change in our life, like things that I think are not gonna go revert back to pre-COVID when this is all said and done, is pretty extraordinary when you kick back and think about it, in terms of where we are, where we work, the time we spend with people, who we spend our time with, how we spend time with them, that kind of thing. Like big fundamental things have really changed.
I was this morning, I was getting a refund on some Spider-Man tickets that my son was very much looking forward to. And we're supposed to go with my brother's family from London. They, two of them tested positive a few days before they were supposed to get on a plane to come over here to San Francisco. And then the guy at the theater was like, okay, do you want a refund for the half of the family that isn't coming? And I was just like, no, let's just we'll just stay home because we're supposed to be flying out to Hawaii in a few days. And I was like, I don't want to take any chances. Like, I've paid for these hotels and rental cars and everything. And my son was saying to me, he's 11, and he said, this COVID has really ruined my childhood. And I felt so bad for him because it kind of has, 2 years of his, from 9 to 11, he's been locked down basically,
My girls, two daughters, one is a freshman in college up in Canada. And we could talk about what it's like to go over the border a lot in a minute. And my younger daughter is a junior in high school here at a local public high school. So for my older daughter, the back half of her high school experience was sort of blown to bits.
Yeah.
I mean, prom, varsity sports,
right,
college, for those that go on to college, like my daughter, the college campus visiting process. Good luck with that last year.
Yeah.
The SAT, Tom, like I had to go. I was scheduling out, searching so far from our home to find a location that was offering the SAT. And I was going up to northern Maine, hours away, and then we'd book it, and then it would get canceled.
Oh.
And finally, they're like, you know what? SAT optional. In fact, we're not even counting it. It's not even an option.
Yeah.
Now I think some schools are going back to optional, but last year for the kids trying to become freshmen, they were told don't even bother. There's all these experiences that they didn't have. When I think back to some of the most, like you'll hear people say, most people, if you ask them when was the best music ever in rock or pop or rap or whatever, usually it'll be like they're like between 18 and 22 years old.
Yeah.
Whatever was awesome when you were 20
Yes.
is still the best.
Yes.
And so many of my favorite memories are from the back half of high school
Yeah.
and college. And that's getting blown up.
Completely. Yeah, and for me, I mean, when we were driving back from the theater, we were listening to some holiday music, and I told my 11-year-old, "Oh, go search up Let Them Know It's Christmas Time on Spotify." And he puts it on. He's like, "Oh, this is a good song." I was like, "Yeah, man, these were." And then we listened to "We Are the World." It was kind of
Oh,
fun
yeah.
going back, and that was a time also where I felt like we as a country were more focused on how we can help each other and help the rest of the world. And it's just that energy is gone now. Now it's like we're just at each other's throats internally all the time.
It's funny. I agree, and there are many reasons for that, and some of them are, I think, cultural, technology, which at moments I'm like, wow, all this social media and YouTube, Facebook, just email, right? I mean, if we're talking about from the mid 90s to today, and I'm a child of the 80s.
Yeah, yeah.
Cell phones, all that. You would think that would make us more interconnected.
You would think so.
And I mean, it's kind of like I heard the late comedian Norm Macdonald say, took everybody's resources and like 3 days to get one picture of your grandfather. And he would have that frozen, like that frozen look, and he goes, I just imagine 75 years from now, somebody's going to be like, hey, do you want to see 3,000 pictures of my grandfather on my phone?
Yeah.
Like it. So at the same time that it's democratized and interconnected us, I think it's just made it a lot easier. And COVID has accelerated this. It's made it a lot easier to be alone too.
Yeah.
And if you look at the way the economy is going too, I mean, America is becoming in many ways disconnected economically for a variety of reasons from the rest of the world in ways that 25 years ago would have seemed unimaginable.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and there are some, I mean, for example, manufacturing. And there are some very good things about it, like you build domestic capacity. COVID, I think, has caused us to realize, wow, if you are dependent on other parts of the world for key parts of a supply chain or talent or knowledge or just work, that means you're at the mercy of other folks, and they may not get along with you so well, or they may be just like America and decide at the end of the day that getting those products that they can help create, keeping them in-house, you're going to watch out for yourself before you're going to watch out for other countries now. And I think that's caused us to actually look inward a little bit more and feel economically like we can be less interdependent with the rest of the world than seemed like the trajectory of 30 years ago. So there's all these macro and micro factors together that are, I think, making it very easy to seem like than ever, but actually often be more alone than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fascinating contradiction. Let's talk a little bit about our man, Andrew Yang. So last time, I don't know were you on? I don't think we talked while he was running for mayor.
I don't think so.
Yeah. So we saw that. So let's start there.
Yeah.
What did you think of the decision to run for mayor, and what did you think of the results and kind of the execution?
So I guess this may also sound a little contradictory or counterintuitive on the surface. If you look at Andrew's decision to run for mayor, of all people, Joe Biden, many, many years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, he said something like this: in politics, you're never standing still. You're either moving up or you're moving down. It means that in terms of the capital you gain or spend in politics, if you gain capital and you don't spend it pretty quick, you're probably going to lose it. Things are going to happen around you. And so if you look at Andrew in the spring of 2020 and really the end of 2020 and the various options that he may have had, I mean, the amount of capital that he had earned starting from nothing a year earlier is historic. One of the things that I would tell people when I was campaigning with them is, I'm like, look, Dwight Eisenhower to Donald Trump, there's nobody in modern presidential political history who has gotten as far as Andrew had, starting as an anonymous person, a non-politician that had no name ID. That if people would say, well, there are these non-politicians who, became successful at one level or another, I'd be like, oh, like who? They'd be like, well, Dwight Eisenhower. I'm like, he beat Hitler. Like, he was one of the most famous people in the world in the late 1940s. Give me a break, And Donald Trump, yes, he had never run for office, but Donald Trump was one of the most famous people in the world. I mean, in modern dollars, it's billions of dollars of free publicity.
Yeah.
That you start with, and then of course most everybody else has a traditional political trajectory. So he had this immense amount of capital, uniquely earned. And I think if he had not spent it, and I'm using that term, if he had not advanced it in some way, then where was it going to go in a couple of years? I mean, you could argue, oh, well, maybe he should run for, governor of New York, or maybe he should run for Congress, or maybe he should take a cabinet position. But I think a lot of things lined up where his passion and opportunity to execute on those passions, there was a lot of factors that mayor of New York was an awfully bold decision to make at that time. But I think it's easy to say because it didn't work out that it wasn't the right decision. But at that moment, I think it was the right decision because he had this unique amount of capital. And I do think that if the primary issues of the race had not shifted as they did from the rebounding from COVID to public safety, law and order, and so forth, I think the former, I think there's a very good chance that Andrew would have won the election. But I think he would say that as soon as it moved to more of a law and order discussion, Eric Adams was in a commanding position to take advantage of that. And I also think the combination of candidates put Adams in a place to have a lane that was more of his own than anybody else, and that several other candidates at the end of the day ended up beginning to cannibalize their own lanes. And these factors put together, and I think Adams was an underrated politician. Certainly, I think those of us that were not from New York City probably did not sufficiently appreciate the impact that the deep roots he had in New York City politics, and so forth. And I respect that those were important factors, and they all came together. And obviously, it was a disappointing conclusion. But Andrew had a ton of capital, and it was a use it or lose it moment. And I respect that he pushed the chips on the table and said, I'm going to use it. I'm going to go for it.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, had he won, I think people would have said, wow, that was such a bold, smart, strategic move. So I can't fault him for going for it. At the same time, it did seem like the issues of the day and the focus on public safety and crime. I mean, I was doing a lot of phone banking for the campaign at that time. And one thing I noticed was the crime stuff kept coming up. People were really concerned about that. And they were kind of, I think a lot of people were also assuming that he was in the defund the police kind of camp.
Yep.
And he didn't really, like, if you looked at his website, there wasn't a clear plan or message the way there was around, say, COVID reform or economic inequality stuff. I'm wondering, like, what do you think was going on inside the campaign? I'm sure they were seeing the polling showing that public safety was becoming around crime was becoming a big deal. It didn't seem like they pivoted the message sufficiently. Do you think they didn't want to, or they couldn't, or what do you think was going on there?
Well, I mean, it's speculative to some extent. I think it's probably a combination of a few things. One is as the focus was moving to crime and law and order, rarely are you going to have, particularly in a Democratic primary, if we're being honest about it, are you going to have a candidate who is so well aligned to take advantage of that specific issue as Eric Adams. I mean, one thing I'll say about Eric Adams, it's not as if he was not in that subject area, not in that lane already, and then he saw the opportunity and he suddenly started giving a crap about law and order.
It kind of came to him. Yeah.
It came to him. And authenticity goes a long way. Look, it's part of the reason why Andrew was such a compelling presidential candidate from where he started, is because he had this authenticity in his message, delivery of it, his style, his campaign style, that attracted a lot of people to give him a look that otherwise never would have. I think in the mayoral race, Eric Adams, there was an authenticity as the message and the messenger in this case coalesced in a perfect way for him. That was very powerful. And so I suspect that the other campaign, not just Andrew's campaign, all the campaigns realized that if this was going to be the issue, this was going to be a real problem for everybody else.
Yeah.
And I think Garcia was the second best position because she had this also authentic and rich story to tell about being a fixer-upper, about understanding kind of under the hood municipal governance. She had kind of a no-nonsense demeanor about her, which was, I think, a very good fit. And again, authentic. I think what you saw with her was what you got. I do believe that Andrew endorsing her, or as a second choice, longer than any other candidate did with any other candidate in that race, helped her a little bit, particularly after Andrew was eliminated and they got to those final three or so candidates. So part of it is, I think the other candidates saw, man, if this thing's going towards crime, this is going to be a tough one for the rest of us. The other part of it is, I'm a big sports fan. I mean, if, there's some football teams, all they have is a running game and they don't have a quarterback that can throw the ball. And at a certain point, I mean, my New England Patriots went into Buffalo a few weeks ago with, terrible wind and some snow and all this. And they knew with a rookie quarterback and all this, and they basically are like, I don't know if we're going to win the game or not, but all we know is we can run the ball all day and we got great defense. That's all we're going to do. And if the game changes and we're down by 15, by 2 touchdowns in the third quarter, usually that's when you would stop that strategy and move to throw the ball. And they were kind of like, it doesn't really matter because this is what we got. And if this isn't going to work, then we're going to lose the game. And I do think there's an element of that. I mean, Andrew was not a law and order candidate. That's not where the passion was. That's not where the background was. He wasn't going to out Eric Adams. It just wasn't going to happen. So at a certain point, you're like, look, this is what I'm bringing to the table. I'm the optimist with the entrepreneurial streak, who's an outsider, who has a lot of ideas and plans on a lot of different things, focused mainly on the economy and COVID recovery. And if it's going to shift too much from that, then, probably not going to win this thing.
Yeah. Do you think if he were in the Biden cabinet now, like SBA or some kind of like mid-tier cabinet role, would he be in a better position now in hindsight than having tried for the New York mayoral and not finishing first?
I mean, hindsight is the key word there, of course. And the answer to that would be better position for what? Right. So if only Andrew can really answer the question of what is going to make him feel happy, fulfilled, most useful, that jibes with his family life. All these things. In my own life, I've had friends and supporters who are like, "Hey, you should run for something in 2022 in New Hampshire." And what I've told them, as I tell anybody, is maybe someday something again. I'll be wiser for it. But I'm like, you know what? I did that for a while. My definition of success includes being able to spend a lot of time with my wife and my kids as they prepare to leave the home and go to school. And I value that time more than ever. Make some money, be home at night, do some other creative thing. So what success really is in the eye of the beholder. And so for Andrew, I don't know. Clearly, on some level, being a cabinet secretary or something like that was almost certainly not as attractive to him in the context of all of these factors as sitting back, checking it out, and then making this mayoral run. Clearly, if he were a cabinet secretary, there would be an immediate relevance in a day-to-day, month-to-month way that that's hard to deny. But there's a lot of variables in there. I think he's happy with where he is in terms of his family and his life, and he's really young by political standards. One thing I love about politics, we're both about the same age. I'm 47. I think he's 46, and it's got to be one of the only walks of life, unless you're Tom Brady, where you could be 47 and people are like, "Oh, you're just a kid in this business."
He's a young guy. Yeah, that's right.
I'm like, yeah, I love it. So he's a young guy in that world, very young.
What do you think? I often wonder if he had been in the cabinet for a couple of years, and then maybe, I guess for New York U.S. Senate, Gillibrand's rolling out like 2025 or something. Like I think her term's coming up in a few years, I guess. It just seems like his voice in the Senate. I mean, these days, those Senate votes seem pretty important.
It certainly is. It's interesting. The thing about being in New York State, reliably Democratic state with no shortage of politicians who would love to be a senator, and that's not an insult. I mean, that's not a ding on them. There would be an awful lot of traffic, and I think that one thing that is by the numbers undeniably true is that if you have a binary choice in a Democratic primary, and this is true, by the way, from everything for state representative in your local legislature to governor or U.S. Senate. If you have a binary choice between a male and a female candidate, the numbers are undeniable that if the resources and basic skills are remotely similar, in Democratic primaries, the woman is far more likely to win that head-to-head primary than the guy is. There are exceptions, but that is generally the case. And I think that is something. And let's face it, it's not a complaint. For a couple hundred years, the culture was such that women weren't even, were looked down on if they wanted to run for the office. So it's hard to, this is progress. But I think that would be another challenge in a major statewide a race like a Senate race for somebody like Andrew. There are a number of very talented, well-known women in New York State who, if they decided to run whether it's open seat or whatever, I think would be in a very commanding position. Same thing with governor, by the way. Right. And I think that would present a challenge that is not insurmountable, but is something that you would have to consider at the beginning of the exercise, the beginning of the process.
Yeah. And what about like a congressional representative? Do you think that would be too small ball for him, or?
Oh, I know. I don't think it's too small ball. I
Yeah.
think that having first of all, look, we're at a place where each of those congressional votes is pretty darn important.
Yeah.
I mean, these are narrow majorities we're talking
Yeah.
about, and I'll be honest, I'm not sure what congressional district Andrew lives in. You know, where I'm in New Hampshire, we got 2 for the whole state, so it's pretty easy to figure out which one you live in. In New York, I mean, that map, you got to zoom way in to figure out the congressional districts in New York City area. It would be very difficult to run against an incumbent who was seeking re-election. It would depend on the matchup. And if there's an open seat, it again probably would be a free-for-all between local elected officials, former these sort of things, state, look, I think in the long run, if Andrew were able to add to his portfolio of experiences sometime in federal office, I think it would be good for the country. It would be great for his constituents, and it would be good for Andrew. He would become, like almost anybody would in his situation, would become a more well-rounded public official. I would be very excited if that was something they wanted to do down the line.
Now we need to talk about the elephant/donkey in the room, which is that he has decided to part ways with the Democratic Party, and he's not going to the Republican Party.
Yeah,
he's doing his own thing. I mean, you talk about long shots. That's not an easy path that he's picked. You gotta take your hat off to him that he's trying to solve a problem. He's trying to kind of go at it first principles. Like, I respect that 100%. I still wonder, like, man, if he had gathered more influence within the Democratic Party for all of its faults, could he potentially have more impact? I guess we'll know in 5 or 10 years, but what were your thoughts when you saw that he was going to make that move?
I mean, it's not what I would have done. I think I'm a lifelong Democrat, proud of it, and although no party is perfect, and not all Democrats are great, and not all Republicans are bad, and all of the small type at the bottom of the page applies. But I believe for better or worse, we are a 2-party system. And that the most effective way to make change happen is through within the 2 parties. I mean, it's certainly not the change I would want to see made, but Donald Trump is actually a pretty good example of somebody who looked at the 2-party system, learned it in the past with Reform Party, Independent Party.
Yeah.
I mean, had the money, certainly in the name ID, to run as an independent, unlike really more than almost any figure in the country. And he basically said, forget it. I'm going to take over the Republican Party. And he did. I mean, it is remarkable that somebody who was self-described pro-choice, a contributor to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, somebody who invited the Clintons to his wedding, that this person, a matter of not like 40 years later, this isn't like Ronald Reagan voting for FDR and then 25 years later flipping to Goldwater. I mean, this is like a few years later, he's like, yeah, I'm a Republican. Yeah, sure, I gave money to Pelosi, whatever. And everyone's like, all right. He took it over. Yeah. And the party is in his hands. I mean, there was a Minnesota Republican gubernatorial forum the other night. I did not watch it live. I have other things to do. But it was extraordinary. So it was in the news, clips of it. And it was, and none of them are big time candidates. So it's, they're all kind of scrapping it out to get the nomination. So they were all asked a question by, what's his name? Hugh Hewitt, the conservative talk show host. Yep. Who looks like a moderate by today's standards because he calls out Trump. And he emceed this thing. And he's like, do you think that Joe Biden won the presidency fair and square. Do you think he actually won the Electoral College?
Mm-hmm.
And none of them would say he did.
Yeah.
I'm like, what, if we can't go there, but this is what I mean, because none of them believe that they can cross the Trump or the Trump base, or they will have no chance of being the Republican nominee.
Yeah.
Which is even more amazing when you consider there are like 5 candidates. And if one of the 5 was like, yeah, maybe I don't like it, but yeah, he won. Hello. Like, you would think that they'd go, oh, okay, well, I can pick off 35% of the party and then I would win. None of them felt like they could. And as it is that Donald Trump has done this, it is evidence that it can be done. And I think in the Democratic Party, I say we as a lifelong Democrat, we are all here sitting around, in some cases standing, like working, but we're all in some form of activity, motion, trying to identify the person and the cause and the trajectory that will engage the party for the next generation, kind of this generational change that the country is overdue for. Mm-hmm. And that there will be, just like Reagan did with the Republicans in 80. I mean, Trump did with the Republican Party in 16, Kennedy in 60, FDR in 32, Teddy Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln. We are overdue for this. And we do this as a country every 30 years, 40 years. And we're waiting for the next. Somebody in the Democratic Party, and I don't know who it is, could be that person to say, follow me. It's part of what attracted me to Andrew in the first place, is I thought that he was unique enough, talented enough, outsider enough, wow enough.
Right.
To be able to be that person, maybe. And I think you could do that from inside the party. And so, that's where I'm at on that.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think would have happened if he had tried to participate in the presidential primary for 2024? Let's say, assuming Biden decided he wasn't gonna run for re-election and it was kind of an open field. I got to imagine he had a chance of being at least like maybe top 3 in Iowa or something like that, right? Or
I mean, a lot of that would depend if we're making the assumption for a moment that Biden will not run again. If he does run again, there would be no primary. If he doesn't, you'd still put your money on Vice President Harris because of history and because of her current position. The resources, the name ID. She's very talented. It obviously didn't work out last time around, but a lot of people become better candidates the second time around, and I think that could well happen there. But it's also increasingly clear that there would likely be a primary. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, if that were the case, there are things that anybody who's thinking about it would have to try to do now, because of it theoretically could be a very competitive, a much smaller field than last time, but a lot of star power at the top. Harris, Buttigieg, for example. And so if you were going to try to be somebody other than one of those kind of 2 or 3 big stars, you would really have to, get your work done early and be planful. And of course, that'd be very difficult because you can't really do anything publicly as long as President Biden is out there saying that he plans on running again, which I'm sure he does at the moment. I suspect he says the truth. He does plan on running again. And if you were out there, nobody in New Hampshire, put it this way, nobody's coming to New Hampshire right now in the Democratic Party saying, hey, don't forget me. I mean, Cory Booker spoke at a Democratic dinner last week and was compelling as he typically is. And he said, I have an announcement tonight. I am running for president of the Maggie Hassan fan club. And because it's there, but you can't do that. So like he gets it. He's good at that. So, it would be very difficult for anybody besides Harris and theoretically Buttigieg because of their name ID and position. And anybody else would have to be working pretty hard right now in a very difficult thread the needle kind of way. But clearly Andrew is one of the people that would be in that next group of, I'm going to throw a number out, 10 or 12 people who would maybe say, hey, maybe. But it will be very tricky for anybody if Biden decides not to run again, not named Harris or Buttigieg.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's pretty much closed that door now, right? I mean, is he pretty much persona non grata within the Democratic Party?
I mean, what we'll see what happens in the months, maybe years to come. I don't think his values have changed one iota. He's the same person. He has the same positions, the same values. He is much, in my opinion, he's a hell of a lot more like a Democrat than he is like a Republican. I mean, it's, and I don't know. I mean, a lot of it depends on the work he does in the weeks, months, and years to come. I'm a big believer that successful political parties are in the math of addition, not subtraction. And one thing about Andrew, beyond votes and social media, all that sort of thing, I saw a chart, I believe it was the Washington Post, many months ago now, that they had a chart of the Republican and Democratic parties and dozens of politicians. And they had little pictures of the head shot of each of them. And the bigger the picture was, the more money they had raised in the most recent election cycle. So it included all the presidential candidates from 2020. And it had lines of various levels of thickness of people that gave to both ends of the two heads and the connection. So it showed that there are some people that if they gave money to Buttigieg, it means a ton of them also gave money to Biden eventually. And it showed this dense, Republican, dense Democrat. And then there was literally one person who was out here, like not connected to anybody else. No lines. Yang.
Right.
And by the way, the head was rather big because he had raised more money than most of the candidates.
Yeah.
So it wasn't Trump, it wasn't Buttigieg. Nobody had raised money from people that had so little connection to any other candidate like Andrew Yang. And to me, that means that as a Democrat, I want Andrew in the party. And I want Andrew's supporters, many of whom, became friends of mine and in person or over online. A lot of good people who were not connected to politics, who got connected because of Andrew. That's an amazing accomplishment. That's part of how we bring the country together. And we need those people in the political process. Obviously, I would prefer the Democratic Party. And so I think that I think that any Democrat who has their head on straight is trying to add people under the tent, and that Andrew maintains a unique ability to bring a group of people in, a significant size group of people, donors, activists, voters, who right now are, if it's not Andrew, they're just not very interested.
Yeah.
We got to keep them in the game.
Yeah. I mean, I do think a lot of the folks who were behind Andrew's presidential were kind of in the wilderness, and they weren't really coming from either party. And now they've, I think, recessed back in the wilderness to some extent. Maybe they'll kind of be part of that forward party movement. But one thing that I will agree with Andrew on, and I think others have observed this, is that primary system definitely seems to reward the most kind of activist type candidates in both parties. And I mean, you being from New Hampshire probably know it better than most. Like, not everybody is super leaned in all the way within the Democratic Party, with like that kind of AOC wing of the party. And I think there are a lot of people kind of centrists who do feel, I mean, I would put myself as like a radical centrist. Like I want kind of innovative things like basic income, and I'm all for like consumption tax and carbon tax, but I'm definitely not for defunding the police or abolishing ICE, you
Yeah.
know? And I think there are people who feel like, well, shoot, my options are this new Republican Party, which seems very nativist and not at all like the party of Reagan or, George Will or any of those types of Republicans, or the Democratic Party, which is saying a lot of things. I'm like, whoa, I can kind of understand where you're coming from, but that seems a little far. And so I agree that there's this like center that's not being spoken to, but it's hard to see how that forward party breaks through. And maybe 5-10 years from now, I'm going to eat these words, and which I would love to, and say like, wow, it's like when when Elon Musk started Tesla, nobody said, oh my God, you crazy, you're going to start a car company from California, like good luck. So maybe Andrew Yang will be like the Musk of politics, but it seems like a long road to get there.
It does, and there's not a lot of precedent for it. To your point, in American history, my daughter goes to school in Canada. My folks are from Canada. I'm a dual citizen. I love following Canadian politics. I love politics, and it's a different system, right? I mean, if you look at it, you've got a number. It truly is a multi-party system that allows shades of difference. That can reward coalition building. Indeed. I mean, the reason why Justin Trudeau is prime minister is the result of a coalition. And this is not unusual. This is very common in much of the world, certainly in Europe. And we're not really used to that in the United States. And unless that culture changed, and that suddenly you had 3 or 4 or 5 parties that had some level of viability to be able to build, some coalitions, we're kind of like, you got 2 choices, y'all. Like, this is it. And we do find, and there's a lot of academic work that's coming out on this, that we're seeing levels of polarization that we've not seen, unfortunately, since maybe, the 19th century, which, some bad things happened because of polarization there. And that the Republican Party is more polarized. They're further along on that. And there's this circular dynamic that's occurring where, as candidates in the 2 parties see that the way they win is to go just a little further to the edge, then it encourages primaries an acceleration of that trend line. And the reality is, and I mean, look, I consider myself pretty progressive, so I'm probably a little further to the left on balance than the average bear, But I read polls, I see what I see, and a plurality of Americans say that they are not quite at either polar end. They're somewhere closer to the middle, and they're complicated. There aren't that many people that are moderate in all issues. People are combinations of, they're not 5s on a 1 to 10 scale on every issue. They're combinations of 3s and 7s or 2s and 8s. Yeah. I mean, and it means that on certain issues, you can get within the 2 parties coalitions. So like, for example, cannabis legalization. You're not going to get some of the social conservatives from the Deep South to go in on that. But you're going to get most Democrats who would be considered progressive Democrats, and you'll get kind of libertarian themed Republicans who are kind of like, why are we regulating this stuff in the first place? And you can build on an issue by issue basis, certain coalitions that I think would give people some renewed hope that maybe you can actually get some stuff done. Even that's getting harder, if we're being honest. And so I still do think, though, that the way to make real progress in our political system is to basically say, look, here's your choice, and I'm giving you this choice. You don't have to agree with all of it. But this is where I think our party, our country, our state, whatever, should be going for the next generation. And we welcome those who don't agree on everything. But we hope that you agree with enough things that you will feel like you can be part of this widening tent as well. I think that's more the message. Instead of having a purity test on this wide menu of issues that, here's 10 things. And if you're only with me on 8 of the 10, then, pound sand. Like you're not going to get anything done on that. You need to work together on the 8 thing, on the 6 things that you do agree on. And then let's work on the other stuff once we get those things done. In fact, with Build Back Better, which Joe Manchin just this weekend indicated he's a no vote on, and that probably sinks the bill. One of the things is I'm like, look, I may disagree with Manchin, and I do, but there are elements of that bill that could probably get 70 votes. And if at the end of the day, if that's all we're going to get now that Manchin has sunk it, then I don't want to drop everything because we can't get some of the, because we can't get all of it. So we can't get some of it now. Too many people need some of the help that's embedded in that large bill to let it all go because we can't get all of it.
Totally agree. Steve, do you have another 15 minutes to talk?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. So before we go, because I want to talk about 2024 and this potential of I can't even believe I'm saying this, another Trump versus Biden election. But before we do that, I do need to take a brief commercial break and thank some of the supporters of this channel. So give me just bear with me while I call out some of our channel members. And if you're watching this and you're not a member, you want to become one, just click the join button. It helps support the streaming costs and podcasting, hosting costs, and video editing software, that kind of thing. So at the highest level, we have Soldier One, who has been a member for 20 months. So thank you, Soldier One. Wow. And then we have Kristen Slevin, Laura Lane, and Bike as the vice president levels. And then the next level down is Hardcore. Mike, Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Byron, Mona, Susan, Yang, Tony, Robert, Dean, Statnerd, Galessa, Jay Perrin, AH, Jay Bryan, Vivian, Dana, Jason, Yoda, and Parth. And then at the entry level, we have our verified nerds, who are Lisa, Sugar, Albert, Brandon, Peter, Erez, Brian, your mom, and Sophia, Jedwiga, Mike, Doris, Emerald, Lori, Ben, Roger, Lisa, Vaughn, Rasta, Elizabeth, James, Emma, Hui, Ira, Patrick, Shoni, Philip, Jameson, Doctor, William, Karen, Monica, Ardent, Semery, Mai, David, Brittany, Sasha, Juana, Warren, Lucky, Kevin, Finney, and H3. And then overall, our newest members are Finney, H3, and Kevin, all less than 6 months old. So thank you to all of you who have stayed with the Nerds for Humanity channel, even though we're kind of still in, we're kind of in between campaigns and not a ton of action, but I'm guessing next year will be pretty exciting. And maybe we should talk about both 22 and 24.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen next year? Traditionally, the control of the House should go to the opposing party. Is that what you think is going to happen?
Well, by the numbers, as you just said, and by history, when a party wins the presidency, and in this case has both the Senate and the House, both by razor-thin majorities, typically at least some of that flips party control. And I think that a lot of strategists I talk to and that we read about nationally acknowledge that. Now, when that doesn't happen, why does it not happen? Right? So what can we learn? And I think that there are a small number of examples in our adult lifetimes where this dynamic did not play out. And they're pretty extreme. So 2002 was a good example. That was the first national election after 9/11 occurred. George Bush was not as popular by November of 2002 as he had been in November of 2001, for example, but he was still pretty popular. And And there were a number. They also had a very good recruiting year, which is relevant to this. That Republicans were able to recruit candidates for competitive seats that often it's hard to do when you're the party in charge, because just like you know, the two of us can be like, oh yeah, I know what the history says. These people aren't dumb. Like, they don't want to spend a year plus running for office knowing that they could kick all the butt they want, but if the headwinds are too strong, they're going to lose anyway, right? These are rational beings. So in 2002, for example, here in New Hampshire, you had Bob Smith, who was a pretty unpopular Republican U.S. senator, incredibly conservative, socially conservative, said a lot of foot and mouth stuff. George Bush and his team, Karl Rove, knew that it was going to be at least a competitive year, even though they were first termers. So they got John E. Sununu, the son of the former chief of staff and governor and the older brother of the current governor of New Hampshire. And he was a member of Congress at the time. They got him to primary Bob Smith in the Republican primary because they knew that outgoing Senator Jeanne Shaheen, outgoing governor rather, was popular. And that if it was Bob Smith versus Jeanne Shaheen, Shaheen would win that. So they successfully got John E. Sununu to primary Bob Smith. He wins that primary. And then he beat Shaheen, who ran a very good campaign, was a very good candidate, but lost. And then, of course, 6 years later, Shaheen got elected to the Senate. But it is not normal that the party in power is able to get somebody like John E. to give up a pretty safe congressional seat to primary a sitting U.S. senator just to take on a sitting governor. But they did that. Able to maximize those kind of matchups. That's a sign of bullishness within the party. It also is it's a sign that people think they can win. So what's the other factor? What's happening macro? So obviously in 2002 you had 9/11 working, in that case, kind of in the favor of Republicans still at that point. If 9 months from now, COVID is seen as having really turned the corner in a way that unfortunately it doesn't feel like yet, that's going to make a big difference if supply chain issues are resolved in 9 months, which I think is which is possible. If inflation has dampened down, and by the way, these things are all related. I mean, if the workforce, which has gotten kind of lopsided in ways we didn't see coming, if that gets resolved, this could go much better for the Democrats. It might allow them to save the Senate. It's going to be very difficult to save the House in any scenario. Redistricting is probably going to, just redistricting in the different states might be enough for Democrats to lose the House, even if it's a competitive year and they recruit pretty well. But a lot of this is not directly in Joe Biden's control or directly in Democrats' control. And the recruiting is, Republicans have struggled to recruit in some high-profile races. Speaking of Sununu, my governor, Chris Sununu, decided not to run against Maggie Hassan in what would be one of the most competitive U.S. Senate seats in the country. She won by 1,000 votes in 2016 against Kelly Ayotte. Very competitive election. Sununu, very competitive candidate. He decided not to run. Republicans don't really have a candidate right now to run against Maggie Hassan. That's a promising sign for Democrats. Republicans are not salivating to run and we see this in a few other states as well. Republicans are struggling to recruit the elite candidates in some of these really competitive races. So I think there's the cone of uncertainty is still pretty wide, but clearly history suggests it could be a tough one for Democrats next year.
Yeah. And if Republicans are struggling to recruit top tier candidates, and it does turn out to be a big kind of turnover year, you could see some kind of fringe Republican candidates somehow get in, like more of the Boebert or the Taylor Greene types, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. And at the congressional level, where the districts continue to get more and more gerrymandered,
right?
the competition is not in the general election. The competition is in the primary. And this is what allows people like Green and Boebert to win, because these are not mainstream general election kind of candidates in a neutral political environment. They're just not. But they're not. They're like, who can be the wildest, who can be the Trumpiest, who can be the most provocative. And so we're going to see more of that. And I do think we're going to see some candidates, particularly on the Republican side, primary incumbents, because they may be empowered by even more extreme districts. And also, I mean, let's look at it. Cori Bush, the freshman congresswoman from the St. Louis area, Democrat, defeated a veteran, multi-term, seemingly pretty popular Democratic congressman in a primary, and then she cruised in the general because she was coming at it from a progressive. Of course, AOC, this is the story of AOC.
Right.
Ayanna Pressley in the Somerville, Massachusetts area. So we're going to see some of this in 2022 on both sides. In the Senate, it's a little tougher because you have a statewide election.
Right.
But if the parties nominate fringier candidates, particularly Republicans trying to take over Democratic seats, remember Claire McCaskill in Missouri, and I'm forgetting the name of the Republican who ended up winning the nomination. He passed away a few months ago. But in 2010, big time Republican year, if my memory serves right, Republicans had a attractive candidate, successful. I think she was a statewide elected official, had been a congresswoman, fairly moderate Republican. McCaskill knew she was probably dead meat against that candidate. Instead, McCaskill actually helped fund with ads commercials that indirectly helped the guy who, remember, he was the guy that said, talked about legitimate rape when he talked about why he was pro-life and so forth. He wins the primary, and then she survives the general. This is the sort of thing we could see a lot of that next year. The question will be, if it was a big Republican year, would it be a big enough year that a candidate like that could be the nominee and then actually win the general because the winds were blowing so much at their neck? We got to keep an eye out for that.
I mean, if you're rooting for the Democratic Party, you kind of want the crazy Republicans to win their primaries and then the general to be more of a normal year. I mean, that could for sure. I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen because that Trump base within the Republican Party is so convinced that they are, in the right on everything, that they do look at the Boeberts and the Greens as like not fringy, crazy candidates, but just speaking their truth, whatever that is. And I worry, as a former Republican, I feel like, what is going on with this party? It used to be a very different party.
And it will be again at some point. I don't know when. And we look, as a lifelong Democrat who wants to win races for Democrats, I'll say it. We need at least two rational, competitive parties that force all politicians to kind of come to the table and work from a common set of facts and values so that the debate is less about positions and more about interests. It's more about data and desired outcomes than it is about sort of sound bites and a kind of sensationalism. We're going to get back there. I believe that as a country. The question for Republicans, as long as Donald Trump is sort of hanging over this, if he runs in 24, it's very hard to see him not being the nominee, just again, by the numbers. And even though he, lost the popular vote both times, and even though it would be hard to imagine that he would be more popular than he was in November of 2020, right? Who knows? I mean, there's so many things I didn't think would happen in the last 5 years that happened. And number two, it's going to be close. If whether Trump, if he's the nominee, runs against Biden, runs against Harris or
Mhm.
runs against somebody else, it's going to probably be pretty close because that's where we're at right now.
God help us. You know, he might be able to beat Harris.
I mean, he almost beat Biden. I
Yeah.
know that he thinks he did, but you know, I mean, even with all the malarkey, to quote Biden, right? He loves that word. He almost won Arizona and he almost won Georgia. And I wouldn't say almost, I mean, he came pretty close to Wisconsin.
Mhm.
Pennsylvania was sort of like, in the game. I
Yeah.
mean, he almost won. I mean, that's, to me, in some ways, the thing that makes me the most intense about remaining politically engaged, but also sort of concerned that I and many others maybe don't fully appreciate how different some of my fellow Americans see the world.
Yeah.
Is the idea that all this stuff could have happened over the 4 years of the Trump presidency, just the stuff that we all acknowledge,
Yeah.
and that after all of that, almost Donald Trump almost won again anyway. Like
Yeah.
that. I mean, I just see the world incredibly different from tens of millions of Americans. And so there's a humility to that, but there's also an intensity that says we as activists, candidates, elected officials, as a party, as Americans, we need to be reaching out to people more. We need to be understanding where people are coming from. We need to go to them, right? If you're waiting for people to come to you,
Mhm.
you're going to be waiting a long time in this country. You have to go to where people are because clearly people are two very different places right now.
If you're Trump, you're probably licking your chops for another shot at either Biden or Harris. Biden, particularly because I doubt Biden will be a stronger candidate in 2024 than he was in 2020. Plus, unless we kind of come out of this pandemic and we get the inflation under control, Trump's going to have a lot to criticize. And God help us if Trump almost won in 2020, even though he handled the initial pandemic so badly and he's such a crazy person. Trump will be just as strong in 2024. He can just, take shots at whatever's not going perfectly. And Biden was not that great of a candidate in 2020, frankly.
The biggest variable that it's kind of funny, probably neither Trump nor Biden have a ton of control over, are these macro factors that it will still be relatively tight because of the way the polarization, the electoral college, and so forth. But look, in 1994, if you had said, hey, Bill Clinton's going to get reelected rather easily in 1996, if I had said to you in December of 1982, Ronald Reagan is going to win with the biggest 49 state blow it out margin in modern American presidential history. These are things that would have been unimaginable the month after the midterm in 82 and in 94.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Obama in December of 10. I mean, those were really dark days for Democrats in terms of the polling and and right now the numbers are not great for Democrats, at the moment, just like they weren't for Reagan in 82. And this is not unprecedented. Sometimes it keeps going down, right? Or it just doesn't get better. But I think that by 2024, the pandemic will be in the rearview mirror. It doesn't mean, by the way, that people won't still get sick, but it will be endemic at that point.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would say that Omicron may be the first strain, and I'm no scientist, but it seems, listening to scientists, that this may be the first strain of it that is going to be that tons of people are going to get, but that will not kill or severely make ill nearly as large a percentage of people who get sick. It's too early to say, But, and that's what makes a pandemic endemic. It will not go away. It will simply become part of our life. That's not amazing, but that's a hell of a lot better, and will not have the disruptive forces on our culture and economy that it now has for almost 2 years. I think inflation will be in much better shape by 24 than it is right now. And you know what? I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Donald Trump, maybe he gets primaried in a way that we don't see right now that is effective, not necessarily in causing Trump to lose the nomination, but in wounding Trump, not unlike the way that Ted Kennedy wounded Carter in 80 or Buchanan over H.W. Bush in 1992. I mean, there's a lot of precedent in our lifetime of incumbent presidents, or in the case of Trump, I mean, he's really an incumbent from the party's perspective, running again, and somebody being like, actually, what? You're not that awesome. I mean, you could argue Bernie with Hillary. Hillary was sort of the default nominee, and Bernie was an afterthought. Who's this guy running? And he, he definitely exposed some of the political weaknesses that Hillary Clinton had, and clearly that played itself through to November of 16. There are things we just can't imagine now that will likely happen in the next few years.
In all those examples, Buchanan, Bernie, Kennedy, like those are people running to the more extreme of the incumbent. Can you imagine anyone doing that to Trump? He seems already so far out there.
This is part of what makes him such a unique figure in the modern history of our politics. Look, there is an ideology to Trump under there. And this is part of where, if Trump could just take 10 or 20% of sort of the shtick that is Trump and just pack it away, he probably would have won. I mean, he almost won anyway. Remember in 2016, I've heard Kellyanne Conway talk about this, that one of the key times where his polling increased by about a critical 4 or 5 points, there was this point in October where he kind of went black for a while, and he basically stopped tweeting as often, doing press. He basically was gaining ground by just getting out of the way of himself for like 3 weeks. And she talks about how that was critical. Trump, there is some ideology in there that Republicans can get behind. But if somebody will not be running ideologically to the right of Trump, they would be running stylistically in a different direction. And I think actually pitching something that says, I can give you all the Trump that you want, the stuff you love about Trump, with a little less of the BS that probably cost him the 2020 election. And by the way, Trump might say, look, Joe Biden is 81 years old, or I think he'll be 81 by election day of 2024. Vote for me because I'm not, sleepy Joe Biden. And the retort, of course, could be, well, yeah, but you're like 76 years old and incredibly bad shape physically, it seems. I mean, he'll be 3 years older from now, too. And it would blunt a potential argument the Republicans would have, which theoretically a younger, more energetic, photogenic, all of the genics, candidate could run and be like, look, I'm with them on immigration. I'm with them on globalization. I'm with them on taxes. I'm with them on all this stuff. I also will nominate Supreme Court justices you'll love, Republican base. But unlike him, I'm actually not going to turn off the 25,000 extra people that would have won us Arizona and Georgia and Wisconsin. I'm not saying that'll work, but I'm saying that there may be 25, 30, 35% of the Republican base that by 2024 will be open to that. And just like Buchanan and Kennedy and so forth, that's all you need to severely wound the eventual nominee. So there are things that could happen. If Biden and Trump have a rematch, I could see Biden winning by a larger margin. I could see Trump winning. That's quite a different America, depending on what happens.
My God. I'm not looking forward to 2024. None of these outcomes. Like I can't see myself jumping up and down for Biden in excitement. I definitely do not. I can't stand Trump, to be honest. And so it seems like I was fine with Biden because I think you were on the show a year ago. We talked about he was going to be a transitional president. I didn't think I was signing up for 8 years.
Well, I mean, and I think in terms of policy, clearly there's some transformational elements that he's been working on. But in terms of the country is still trying to figure out where it wants to go for the next 20 to 40 years. Mm-hmm. Like I said earlier, as it did, if you look at the period in the late 19th century where we had a number of presidents that, frankly, today we have trouble remembering. Who doesn't want to opine about the Chester Arthur years? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, we had a couple of assassinations. We had a lot of transition. We had 3 assassinations in 36 years between 1865 and 1901. We had a bunch of one-term presidents. We had a president who won, then lost, then won again, Grover Cleveland. We had all kinds of stuff going on. And part of that was because the country was trying to figure out, after the Civil War, in the midst of industrial transformation, what were we going to be? And it ended up not being somebody who got elected. It ended up being somebody who ascended to the presidency because of an assassination, Teddy Roosevelt, who became sort of the dominant political figure that moved the country in a bold direction. A lot of that was personality, and some of that was also policy. Today, that person would not be a Republican. Teddy Roosevelt would lose a primary. That's in today's party. Sometimes we don't see it coming until it's pretty much on us. There will be these messy years before the transformational figure wins. Jimmy Carter squeaked out 1976, despite having Watergate giving him this massive wind at the back. He was up by 33 points after the conventions, and they were waiting for Hawaii to come in, him and Jerry Ford. In 1976, Jimmy Carter did a lot of wonderful things, certainly post-presidency, but tough job he had in 76. But he was a transitional president in hindsight, and the country was still trying to figure out what it wanted to be. And by 1980, Ronald Reagan, it's not what I would have picked, but Ronald Reagan was like, "Hey guys, I'm offering something big and bold with a transformational personality and unique political skills." Mm-hmm. And for 20 years, we've been going on that. Yeah. We're going to be going to something else soon. And Trump, this careening of the roller coaster car, trying to stay on the tracks. You're like, all right, what if I told you that we're going to go from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan, and then we're going to go for kind of a blue blood, George H.W. Bush, and then we'll go for a guy from Arkansas. And then we're going to go back to the son of the blue blood. And then we're going to go with a guy named Barack Obama. And then when that's done, we're going to go to Donald Trump. That's a wildly careening car.
It is. Well, I have a feeling, Steve, we're going to have you back on the show a lot next year because there's going to be a lot of craziness that we'll be watching. And really appreciate you spending time. And I know we're way over the time we allotted. It went by pretty quick, as always.
It always goes by quick. It's always a pleasure to be with you and your other guests that you have. And I think you're right. 2022 is going to be important. It's going to be fascinating. And I'll be there for it. And I know you will be too. So anytime.
You know it. While we end with this, what is your prediction on who controls Congress in 22? And what will be the presidential tickets in 24?
Today for the presidential, you'd have to bet it'd be Trump and a VP that is not Mike Pence, pretty clearly. And I think you have to say until further notice, it's going to be a Biden-Harris ticket in 24. So I think our most likely scenario is more or less a rematch, which is going to be mind-blowing. And then in terms of Congress, again, if we're just going by history, Just redistricting alone will probably give Republicans a majority in the House. And I think the Senate is going to be very close because Republicans are failing to seal the deal on some recruiting that might have made more competitive races and some, potentially vulnerable incumbent Democrats. But Republicans, I think, are probably at least 50-50 to have a narrow majority in the Senate, a somewhat larger majority by percentage in the House. And then we get ready in 2023, a lot of gridlock in that scenario. And then a Biden-Harris versus Trump and TBD rematch in 24. I think that's where we're heading.
Well, the TBD, do you think it's DeSantis or do you think it's someone else?
I don't think it'd be DeSantis. Everything you read suggests that there's been a little bit of a fissure there.
Yeah.
It's interesting because DeSantis, in theory, would sort of fit my description earlier of somebody who was a lot of the things you like about Trump, if you like Trump, without a few of the things that would turn off somebody to Trump.
Yeah.
It also would likely take Florida out of play. It's been floating Republican in the last few elections anyway. But, in terms of resources, certainly for Republicans, if there was a Floridian, on the ticket, particularly if it wasn't Trump, it was DeSantis, you would think that it would allow the redistribution of resources to other states. But I don't think DeSantis would be the VP. One person that I think Trump says good things about would be Tim Scott from South Carolina. That wouldn't blow my mind. I also think that there's an increasing amount of pressure for Republicans to nominate certainly a non-white guy, and more specifically to nominate a woman for vice president in 24. So, then you'd have to kind of explore for a minute if who would be a woman if Trump were the nominee that he might select to be the vice president. And that one, I'd have to think on that one for a while, but it won't be Pence. That seems pretty certain at this point.
Yeah, I mean, a Hispanic woman would be pretty interesting on Trump's undercard, if you will. I guess Nikki Haley, is she no longer? Are they on the outs? Is she no longer in sort of in this inner circle?
She seems to have done a better job than most people in the Trump administration, and simultaneously remaining in the relative good graces,
right?
While also not completely getting tarred, as like a Trumpster.
Yeah,
she is. I mean, whatever you think of her, and again, I'm a lot more progressive certainly than Nikki Haley, but from a pure talent point of view.
Yeah,
it's pretty obvious she has a lot of talent, a lot of political talent. Another woman that I know has been very consistently pro-Trump, he speaks very well of, is South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem.
Right.
That would be, Democrats have, certainly if you're looking for a non-white guy candidate for any office, generally speaking, Democrats have a much deeper bench with a ton of talent. That could go in a variety of directions in that regard than the Republicans generally do. But again, you're talking about vice president in this scenario. And there's certainly enough political talent that if Trump wants to go there, I'll tell you, it won't be Mike Pence. It's not going to be Chris Christie. We know that. Doesn't seem like it'd be DeSantis. But, Trump, he'll do whatever he wants to do. I don't think he's going to be bound by peer pressure.
No.
But that's going to be potentially one of the more interesting moments of 2024.
Right.
I mean, for all I know, he could decide to run and pick his VP and say, "This is my ticket, y'all. Get out of the way."
Yeah.
Totally could do that.
Well, if we know anything, he's gonna make it interesting, and it'll be a big reveal and exciting, and he'll have be seen having lunch with all kinds of people, and we'll create a lot of opportunities for us to opine. Steve,
you got it.
I hope you have a very safe and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. I hope 2022 is going to be a better year for all of us than 21 was, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Oh, same to you. Merry Christmas to you. Happy New Year to you. To all of the nerds out there, supporters of Nerds for Humanity. And I look forward to being back on soon.
Goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.
I love it.